First contact and desperate call. The once magnificent crystalline spires of Arcadia Prime jutted like broken teeth against the amber sky. Ambassador Kelleth stood at the viewport of the last functioning government tower, watching as another orbital bombardment turned the western districts into molten glass. 3 months ago, this had been the cultural capital of the Arcadian conclave, a place where art, science, and philosophy had flourished for 12 centuries. Now it was just another conquest of the Corvan dominion. Any response from the coalition worlds? Kelleth asked, not turning from the viewport. First Minister Tallis shook her head, the luminescent patterns on her skin dimming with despair. None that offer aid. The Viridians send thoughts and prayers. The Juraxians claim resource shortages. The Bryn Commonwealth is deeply concerned, but unwilling to risk Corvan retaliation. So much for our allies. Kelleth's voice was bitter. The Arcadians had spent generations building diplomatic relationships, establishing trade networks, sharing their medical and agricultural advancements freely. When the Corvans came, those bonds proved as substantial as vapor. "We have one option left," said Tallis, her voice barely above a whisper. "Though I hesitate to even suggest it." Kelleth finally turned from the viewport, his 4 eyes focusing on the First Minister. "You mean the humans." The word hung in the air between them. Humans, the newcomers to galactic society, a species that had appeared suddenly 50 years ago, established minimal diplomatic contact, claimed a modest sector of space, and then mostly kept to themselves. They traded occasionally, shared little of their technology, and seemed content to observe rather than participate in galactic politics. "We know almost nothing about them," Kelleth cautioned. "We know they've never been conquered," Tallis countered. "The Corvans attempted to expand into their territory 3 years ago. 1 week later, the Corvans signed a non-aggression pact and withdrew completely. Rumors and speculation." Kelleth waved a hand dismissively. "And even if true, why would they help us when the established powers won't?" The tower shuddered as another bombardment struck nearby. Warning signals flashed across the command consoles. Tallis moved to a terminal, her fingers dancing across the controls. "Our planetary shields are at 12%. Evacuation transports can only accommodate another 20,000 civilians. We have 8 million people still on the surface." She looked up at Kelleth, desperation in her eyes. "We have nothing to lose by asking." After a moment's hesitation, Kelleth nodded. "Send the message." Captain Ayanna Chen sat in her quarters aboard the UES Vigilant, reviewing tactical reports when her comms pinged with a priority alert. As commander of Earth's furthest observation post, Chen expected the usual updates: border skirmishes in the Perseus Arm, trade disputes in the Sagittarius region, or scientific data from exploration vessels. What she didn't expect was a direct distress call from a species the Terran Confederation had minimal contact with. The message was simple: to any human representatives, the Arcadian conclave faces extinction at the hands of the Corvan Dominion. Our once allies have abandoned us. Our defenses fail. If you can hear this, if you can help, we beg your intervention. We have nothing to offer but our gratitude and what remains of our civilization." Chen's brow furrowed as she studied the attached data: tactical assessments, casualty reports, and sensor readings showing the systematic destruction of Arcadian worlds. The Corvans weren't just conquering, they were eradicating. Protocol dictated she forward this to Confederation Command. This wasn't her decision to make, but protocol also allowed discretion in emergency scenarios. Chen activated her secure channel to Earth. "Confederation Command, this is Captain Chen of the Vigilant. I'm registering an Omega-7 situation in the Libra sector, requesting immediate authorization for Operation Thunderbolt." There was a pause before the response came. "Vigilant, this is Admiral Zhao. Confirm Omega-7. What's your assessment, Captain?" "The Arcadians are facing extinction-level action from the Corvan Dominion. Their planetary shields will fail within 24 hours. If we intervene, we need to do it now." Another pause. Chen could imagine the flurry of activity her message had triggered at command. Strategic assessments, diplomatic considerations, the weighing of consequences. Authorization granted, Captain. The 7th Fleet is yours. Deploy according to Thunderbolt parameters. Remind the Corvins why they signed that non-aggression pact. Chen allowed herself a grim smile. Understood, Admiral. Vigilant out. She opened a fleet-wide channel. All vessels, this is Captain Chen. We have authorization for Operation Thunderbolt. Combat readiness in 30 minutes. We're going to pay the Corvin Dominion a visit. First Minister Tallis had not slept in 3 days. The orbital bombardment had intensified, and the planetary shields were flickering like a dying heartbeat. Evacuation ships were being targeted despite their non-combatant status. The Corvins wanted no survivors, no witnesses to their brutality. Any response from the humans? She asked, not for the first time. Keleth shook his head. Nothing. Perhaps our message never reached them. The operations center suddenly erupted with alarms. Monitors flashed warnings of spatial distortions forming at the edge of the system. The Corvins are bringing in reinforcements, someone called out. Keleth closed his eyes briefly. This was the end, then. More Corvin ships meant the final assault would begin within hours. Wait, said the sensor operator, confusion in her voice. These aren't Corvin signatures. I've never seen readings like this. The main display showed a rippling tear in space, expanding rapidly. From within this distortion emerged ships, sleek, angular vessels with no visible propulsion systems, their black hulls absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Unknown fleet, identify yourselves, the communications officer transmitted. The response came almost immediately, broadcast not just to the operations center, but to every communication device in the system, Arcadian and Corvin alike. This is Captain Ayanna Chen of the United Earth ship Vigilant. In response to your request for assistance, the Terran Confederation has deployed the 7th Fleet to the Corvin Dominion. You have 1 hour to cease all hostilities against the Arcadian Conclave and withdraw from this system. Failure to comply will be met with appropriate force. The operations center fell silent. Then someone began to laugh, a sound of disbelief tinged with desperate hope. On the display, more human ships continued to emerge from the spatial distortion. Not dozens but hundreds of vessels, arranging themselves in perfect formation. They came, Tallis whispered. They actually came. Keleth watched the display, his 4 eyes wide with amazement. But will it be enough? The answer would come sooner than anyone expected. The awakening giant. Supreme Commander Vexlar of the Corvin Dominion observed the human fleet with contempt. His flagship, the indomitable Will, dwarfed even the largest of the human vessels. Around him, 500 Corvin warships stood ready, the mightiest armada in this sector of the galaxy. So the Arcadians found someone foolish enough to die with them. He remarked to his staff officers, "Who are these humans to challenge the Dominion?" His intelligence officer stepped forward cautiously. "Supreme Commander, our records on human military capabilities are limited. We do have the report from General Corthal's expedition to their territory 3 years ago." Corthal was weak. Vexlar spat. He retreated before securing proper victories. Whatever trickery these humans employed against him will not work against me. As you say, Supreme Commander. Vexlar studied the tactical display. The human fleet had positioned itself between the Corvin Armada and Arcadia Prime, a protective gesture, but ultimately futile. "Transmit my response to their ultimatum," he ordered. "Tell them the Corvin Dominion does not recognize their authority, nor do we negotiate with interfering primitives. They have 30 minutes to withdraw or be destroyed alongside the Arcadians." As the message was transmitted, Vexlar began issuing battle orders. The humans would be overwhelmed by superior numbers and firepower. This would be a lesson to any other species considering interference in Dominion affairs. Aboard the Vigilant, Captain Chen received the Corvin response without surprise. As expected, she noted to her executive officer, Commander Jackson, they never choose the easy way. Their fleet outnumbers us almost 2-1, Jackson observed. Numbers aren't everything, Chen replied. Activating the fleet-wide tactical network. Deploy Phase 1 countermeasures. Signal all ships. Operation Thunderbolt is now active. Throughout the human fleet, specialized vessels moved into position. No weapons were fired, no aggressive maneuvers made. Instead, invisible waves of quantum-entangled particles began to spread outward, enveloping the space between the opposing forces. On the Corvin flagship, alarms suddenly blared. "Supreme Commander, we're experiencing systems interference," reported the tactical officer. "Long-range sensors are degrading. Ship-to-ship communications becoming unreliable." Vexlar snarled. "Countermeasures. Deploy electronic warfare protocols." "Attempting, sir, but our countermeasures are having no effect. Whatever they're using, it's not technology we've encountered before." On dozens of Corvin ships, the same scene was playing out. Systems failures, communications breakdowns, targeting computers becoming unreliable. No physical damage, but a creeping blindness spreading through the mighty Armada. "Enough of this," Vexlar growled. "Begin the attack. All ships, advance and fire at will." The Corvin fleet surged forward, energy weapons charging. But as they moved into firing range, the human fleet executed a maneuver that defied conventional tactics. Instead of maintaining their defensive line, they scattered in what appeared to be random directions, creating gaps in their formation, gaps through which the Corvins could potentially reach Arcadia Prime. "They break already," Vexlar laughed. "Forward. Target their capital ships first, then proceed to the planet." The first wave of Corvin warships pushed through the gaps in the human formation, weapons firing. But their shots found only empty space where human ships had been moments before. And then, as the Corvin vanguard passed through, the trap closed. Human vessels that had appeared to retreat suddenly reversed course, their propulsion systems demonstrating acceleration capabilities far beyond anything the Corvins had witnessed. The scattered formation reconstituted, not as a defensive line but as an encircling sphere, trapping the lead elements of the Corvin fleet in a three-dimensional cage of human warships. And then, finally, the humans opened fire. There was no flashy energy discharge, no brilliant beams of light. Instead, hypersonic projectiles accelerated to relativistic speeds, tore through Corvin shields as if they didn't exist, punching clean holes through armor and vital systems. Ships that had weathered bombardments from the most advanced weapons in known space were suddenly reduced to drifting hulks, their power cores breached, their atmospheres venting into the void. In the Arcadian Operations Center, stunned silence gave way to disbelief. "Are you seeing this?" Keleth whispered. Talus could only nod, watching as the tactical display showed Corvin warships, vessels that had terrorized their civilization for months, being systematically disabled or destroyed by the human counterattack. "Their weapons, I've never seen anything like it," said the Arcadian tactical officer. "No energy signatures we can detect. Whatever they're using, it's beyond our understanding." Outside the viewport, they could see flashes of light as Corvin ships exploded in the distance. The orbital bombardment of their world had ceased entirely as the Corvin fleet redirected all resources to the new threat. Vexlar watched in mounting horror as the tactical display showed ship after ship going dark. The first wave, 60 of his finest warships, had been neutralized in less than 15 minutes. "Pull back the vanguard," he ordered. "Regroup the fleet. Concentrate fire on Sector 7. But Sector 7 had already changed. The human ships moved with impossible agility, never where the Corvin targeting systems predicted they would be. And they were learning, adapting their tactics in real time to counter Corvin responses. "Supreme Commander," his second-in-command ventured hesitantly, "perhaps we should consider a strategic withdrawal to." "No retreats," Vexlar roared. "The Dominion does not yield. All remaining ships form Battle Group Omega. We will concentrate our firepower and punch through their lines." The Corvin ships began to consolidate, forming a massive spearhead with the indomitable will at its center. It was a formation that had broken planetary defenses and opposing fleets countless times, overwhelming force concentrated at a single point. Aboard the Vigilant, Captain Chen observed the Corvin maneuver with clinical detachment. "They're desperate," she noted, moving to predictable tactics. "Should we counter with Formation Delta?" asked Commander Jackson. Chen shook her head. "No need. Execute Operation Thunderbolt, Phase 2. Jackson's eyes widened slightly. "Phase 2. Are you certain, Captain?" "The Corvins need to understand exactly what they're facing," Chen replied. "Signal the Artemis and the Orion. Tell them they have weapons free." At the edges of the battlefield, two human vessels that had thus far remained uninvolved suddenly accelerated toward the consolidated Corvin formation. Unlike the smaller human warships, these were massive platforms, not quite as large as the Corvin flagship, but imposing nonetheless. On the indomitable will, Vexlar noted the approaching vessels with grim satisfaction. "They send only 2 ships against our combined might. This will end quickly. All ships prepare to fire on my mark." But before he could give the order, the 2 human vessels released what appeared to be swarms of small objects, thousands of them, spreading outward like clouds of metallic insects. "Missile countermeasures," Vexlar commanded. "They're not missiles, Supreme Commander," the tactical officer reported, confusion in his voice. "They're drones, autonomous weapons platforms." Whatever they were, they moved with coordinated precision, weaving through space toward the Corvin formation. Point defense systems fired frantically, destroying dozens, then hundreds of the objects. But there were too many, and they were too fast. When they reached the Corvin ships, they didn't explode. Instead, they attached themselves to hulls, weapon emplacements, sensor arrays, and engine nacelles, and then they began to systematically dismantle the Corvin warships from the outside, cutting through armor with molecular dissemblers, targeting critical systems with surgical precision. Ship after ship went dark, not destroyed but rendered completely inoperable as vital systems were selectively removed by the human weapons. Vexlar watched in disbelief as his mighty armada was reduced to floating derelicts, powerless and adrift. And still the 2 human vessels had not fired a single conventional weapon. The Reckoning and New Alliance. Aboard the indomitable will, chaos reigned. The swarm had reached the flagship, cutting through its outer defenses with ease. Emergency force fields activated and failed. Deck by deck, systems went offline as the microscopic machines invaded the ship. "Get them off us," Vexlar raged. "Deploy all security personnel. Use handheld weapons if necessary." But it was futile. The drones weren't attacking personnel, only technology. They moved through ventilation systems, along power conduits, into control centers, systematically disabling the mighty warship without harming its crew. Finally, as the bridge lights flickered and died, replaced by dim emergency illumination, Vexlar faced the unthinkable. Defeat, complete and utter defeat. His communications officer looked up from his console, the last still partially functioning. "Supreme Commander, we're receiving a transmission." From the human flagship, Vexlar stared at the main viewport, now showing only the starry void as all external cameras had failed. After a long moment, he nodded. "Put it through." The image of Captain Chen appeared on the screen, her expression impassive. "Supreme Commander Vexlar, your fleet has been neutralized. Your ships are disabled but largely intact. Your crews are unharmed. This demonstration was restrained. It does not represent the full extent of our capabilities." Vexlar's mandibles clicked in suppressed rage. "You think this humiliation will go unanswered? The Dominion spans 1,000 worlds. We will return with 10,000 ships." Chen's expression didn't change. "Before you make threats, understand what you're facing. The fleet you encountered today represents less than 5% of the Terran Confederation's active forces. The weapons we deployed were defensive systems designed to minimize casualties. We have others." She gestured, and the viewport display changed, showing a recording of a barren moon. As Vexillar watched, a single human vessel entered the frame, deployed what appeared to be a small probe toward the moon, and then retreated to a safe distance. The probe impacted the surface, and the entire moon shattered, breaking apart into fragments as if its molecular bonds had simply ceased to exist. "That," Chen continued as the display returned to her face, "is what we consider a weapon of last resort. We have never deployed it against a living world. We hope we never have to. But make no mistake, Supreme Commander, if the Corvan Dominion threatens the Arcadian people again, or any other civilization under our protection, our response will not be as measured as it was today." Vexillar could only stare at the human captain, his worldview crumbling around him like the moon in the recording. "You have 6 hours to evacuate your personnel to habitation modules we will provide. Your ships will be towed to the edge of this system and left with minimal life support and communications equipment. How you find your way home is your concern." Chen leaned forward slightly. "And when you report to your leaders, make sure they understand. The Arcadian Conclave is now under Terran protection, as are all peaceful civilizations in this sector. The era of Corvan expansion is over." The transmission ended, leaving Vexillar in the dim light of his failing flagship, surrounded by the quiet sounds of defeat. 3 weeks later, Ambassador Keleth stood in a conference room aboard the Vigilant, facing Captain Chen and a delegation of human officials who had arrived from Earth. The viewport showed Arcadia Prime below, reconstruction already underway with human assistance. "The Arcadian people cannot adequately express our gratitude," Keleth said. "You saved not just our world, but our entire civilization from extinction." Chen nodded acknowledgement. "We responded to a call for help. Any decent civilization would have done the same. Yet none did," Keleth noted. "Our supposed allies abandoned us. Only humanity answered." The lead human diplomat, a woman named Ambassador Torres, leaned forward. "Which brings us to the purpose of this meeting. The Terran Confederation believes it's time we take a more active role in galactic affairs. Recent events have made it clear that the current balance of power is unstable." "You mean the Corvans," Keleth said. Torres nodded. "Them, and others like them. For 50 years, humanity has observed, learned, and kept largely to ourselves. We established minimal contact, claimed only the space we needed, and avoided entanglements in interstellar politics." "Why?" Keleth asked, his 4 eyes blinking in sequence. "With your technology, your military capabilities, you could have been a dominant force from the beginning." Captain Chen exchanged glances with Torres before answering. "Because of our history. Humanity nearly destroyed itself multiple times before we unified. We know the dangers of unchecked aggression, of expansion for its own sake. We didn't want to replicate those mistakes on a galactic scale." "But now you're proposing a change in policy?" Keleth asked. "A necessary one," Torres confirmed. "We've watched too many peaceful civilizations suffer while we maintained our distance. The Corvans were just the most recent example. There are others expanding through conquest, others who respect only strength." She extended a data tablet, displaying a proposal. "We're offering the Arcadian Conclave formal alliance with the Terran Confederation. Not subjugation, not protectorate status, but true partnership. Your cultural and political autonomy would remain absolute, but together with others who share our values, we can create a community of worlds that stand against aggression." Keleth studied the proposal, his expression thoughtful. "The other powers will see this as a power grab by humanity." "Perhaps initially," Chen acknowledged. "But we're extending the same offer to all peaceful civilizations in this sector, even former Corvan conquests, once they've reestablished their independence. Which they're doing rapidly, now that the Dominion has withdrawn to its core systems." Torres added. "The Corvan defeat here has sparked rebellions across their territory. Their empire is collapsing." Keleth set down the tablet. And what does humanity gain from these alliances? Chen smiled slightly. Perspective, art, science, cultural exchange, the things that make civilization worth defending in the first place. We've spent 50 years watching the galaxy from a distance. Now we'd like to be part of it. Keleth was silent for a long moment, considering. Then he extended his hand in the human gesture he had learned. The Arcadian conclave would be honored to be your first allies. As they shook hands, First Minister Tallis stepped forward from where she had been observing. There's something I still don't understand. Why did you respond to our call when no one else would? You had no obligation to us. Captain Chen's expression grew serious. In our history, there were moments when powerful nations stood by while others were destroyed. When good people did nothing because the problem seemed distant or difficult. We promised ourselves we would never make that mistake on a galactic scale. She gestured toward the viewport, toward the planet being reborn below. Every civilization deserves the chance to reach its potential, to create, to learn, to grow. The Corvins would have denied you that chance. We couldn't let that happen. Tallis studied the human captain's face, seeing the conviction there. The Corvins believed strength meant the ability to destroy. You showed them otherwise. True strength, Chen replied, isn't about destruction. It's about what you choose to protect. As the meeting concluded and formal alliance documents were prepared, word was already spreading across the galaxy. Humanity had finally revealed itself as a power unlike any other, not through conquest or intimidation, but through an act of protection that defied all expectations. The sleeping giant had awakened, not with a shout of dominance, but with a promise of partnership. And throughout the stars, both allies and enemies alike began to reassess everything they thought they knew about the species called human.